Okay, so what we're going to learn in lesson 3 is we're going to look at a different type of loop called a for loop. And there are actually 3 types of for loops we're going to learn in this class. This first lesson talks about the first 2 types. So just like the last couple of days, the same 3 learning targets so that we can understand the concept of an iteration, or when we're repeating a loop, we can write what's called a for loop, and we can trace through a for loop and track the values of its variables in Python. So a for loop is known as what's called a definite loop, and that's because every time a for loop runs, right before it runs, we know how many times it's going to run. It's a defined value. So you'll notice here that what we're going to have is a beginning and an ending condition for our for loop every time it runs. And here you can see the first type of for loop. So you'll notice this looks different. Yes, it starts with the word for, which you probably expected, but the rest of this looks a little bit different. So everything in blue are things that we can change. Everything in black are things that we need to leave as is. So you can see for, then we have a variable. Typically, people use the variable I, but you can use any letter that you would like. So you can use I, you can use J, K, you can give it an actual name, but it's really just a variable that says this is where the value that's being iterated is going to start. Now in this specific types, remember there are 3 types of for loops. This one says for your variable value in range, and you put in another value. So this one, the variable that you input here, it's always going to start at the value of 0. And in this type of for loop, by default, the for loop adds 1 to the variable every time it runs an iteration through the loop. So every time it runs this set of code here in the statements or the loop body, it's going to add 1 to I and loop back up to the top. The loop will then run while the variable is less than this value here. So this will make more sense when we start tracing it through, but this variable that you enter starts at 0. It then adds 1 to that variable every single time the for loop runs, and it will keep going while this condition is true. The second this condition is no longer true, that's what's going to pop you out of that loop. So you can see a for loop, it really sets you up so that as long as you type in a variable value here and a value here, you can't get stuck in this loop. It's going to run a definite number of times, and then you're going to pop out. Okay, so we're going to jump right in and we're going to trace through a program so you can start to see how this works. So this says for I in range 10. So notice in this particular thing we have 2 loops that are going to go. So here is the first one. It says for I in range 10. So we have a variable called I, and remember in this type of for loop, that variable always starts at 0. So then what's going to happen is we're going to have an output that's printing to the screen. And every time this for loop runs, it prints I to the screen. And then it's going to pop back up. This one automatically adds 1. So this is going to change to 1. 1 is still less than 10, so it's true. And as a result, it's going to print I to the screen again. And then it adds 1 at the very, very end, and it rechecks it. And 2 is still less than 10, so it's going to print 2 to the screen. Then it adds 1 as it loops back up, checks, that's still true. Outputs 3 to the screen. And this is going to keep going. So it's going to keep repeating this code, keep outputting to the screen until we get to 9. And when we get to 9, what's going to happen is it's going to pop back up here, and it's going to change I to be 10. So we've printed 9 to the screen. I is now 10. We have 10 is less than 10. And this statement is false. So once I becomes the same value as your value that you entered in for that number after range, it's going to pop out of the loop and continue on its way. So that's how you pop out. Now here, what this would do, this line of code to kind of show there's a break between the 2 loops, this would print a blank line. And then we would go down to this for loop, and that same process is kind of going to take place. So here we have We're calling I num instead. That's perfectly fine. You get to choose your variable name there. But num still starts at 0. So now I'm just going to move this up here because I don't have space down there anymore. But this one does the same thing. It's going to print number to the screen. So it's going to print 0. And then, because it's the same, there should be an in here. Sorry about that. Because it's the same type of for loop, it's going to do the same thing. It's still going to add 1 to num. And then it'll print to the screen. And then it'll add 1 to num, and it'll print to the screen. Add 1 to num, print to the screen. Add 1, print to the screen. And when it gets to 5, again, it's a situation where we have 5 is less than 5. It's going to stop, leave the loop, and run down below. So notice it doesn't print 5, it doesn't print 10, because the loop doesn't run when it's 5 is less than 5 or 10 is less than 10. So in this particular for loop program, I ends at 10, num ends at 5, and we print all of these values to the screen. All right, so second example here, we have sum, which starts at 0. We then have for x, that's another variable being created, and in this type of for loop, x starts at 0 as well. We notice the range is 7, so we always want this to run when x is less than 7. So we start off, we say sum is sum plus x, which is 0 plus 0, which is 0. And then we print x to the screen. X is currently 0, and it's after this point that we add 1. So x is now 1. It's still less than 7, so we add the two together for our sum. Print x, which is 1, to the screen. Then that's when we add 1 again. So x now becomes 2. Add sum and x together. Output x to the screen. Then we add 1 again. Still less than 7. So x becomes 3. Add the two together. So sum becomes 6. Output x to the screen. Add 1 again. X becomes 4. That's still less than 7. Add the two together, sum becomes 10, print x to the screen. Loop back up and add 1, so x becomes 5. 5 is still less than 7, so this code is going to run. Add these two together, so we get 15, print x to the screen. Loop back up. As I do so, I add 1 to x, so x is now 6. That is still less than 7, so I add the two together, print x to the screen. Loop back up, check. As I do so, x becomes 7. 7 is not less than 7, so that's where I pop out, and I print my sum, which is 21, to the screen. Okay, so now we're going to look at for loop type number 2, and this one looks a little bit different. So this one says for, it has that same variable that you can choose the name of, and notice this says values. So what you're going to do here is you're going to put multiple values in here, and your variable is just going to become equal to those values as it runs. So if you have 5 values in here, the loop runs 5 times. If you have 10 values in there, the loop runs 10 times. So previously, the first type, it was for this variable in value, and it would run until the variable went from 0 to that value. This one's a little bit different. It's only going to run until it cycles through all of the values that are listed here. Okay, so you can see an example here. I have 2 different loops going on. So here it says for I in, and it has a list of values. So what's going to happen is I is going to start at this first value. And then all it does is print to the screen. So it's going to print out 1. I've used up that value, so the second time around, I becomes 3. I print 3 to the screen. Used up that one, next time around, I becomes 5. Print 5 to the screen. Next time around, I becomes 7. Print 7 to the screen. Next time around, I becomes 9. Print 9 to the screen. When I run out of values, I leave the loop. I leave a blank space, because that's what that print with no words inside of it is going to do. And then what you'll notice here is that the reason I have J is because I want to show you that it doesn't matter what these values are, whether they're strings, integers, floats, they're all going to run through. J is going to become equal to each one of them. So in a for loop like this, you don't have to specify that they're all going to be numbers or they're all going to be words. You just say, this is what I want to happen. These are the things I want J to be equal to. Please work with those. So in this one, J starts off being equal to 3. It prints 3 to the screen. Goes back up, says, hey, I was already equal to 3. So now I'm going to print hello. Use that one up. Now I'm going to print 6.25. So you can see here that it just runs through and takes these values. So this one, you can't really change it. You just have to say this is what's going to run, and it's just going to do it for you. But you can again see how you can do something very, very quickly by just throwing your values in there. So those are the 2 for loops we're going to focus on today. The one where we go from 0 to a particular number, and the one where we can select all the values and specify what we want our for loop variable to be equal to. All right, last program we're going to trace through together. This one's just a little bit different. So here we have for I in, and we have a list of values. So we start off with I is equal to 1. So we're going to print 3 times I to the screen, which 3 times 1 is 3. We loop back up. Now we're equal to 5. We're going to print 3 times 5, which is 15. Loop back up. We have I is equal to hello. So we're going to print 3 times hello, which is just hello, hello, hello. Just going to print the word 3 times all smushed together. Now that we've gone through all 3, it's just going to print end of program.